When we talk about investing, it's so easy to get fixated on just one thing, right? That big number, that financial goal we're trying to hit. But what if I told you that actually achieving your goals is way more complicated than just hitting a target? Today, we're going to dive into some of the hidden dangers that can trip you up even after you think you've already won. So let's really unpack this question for a second. What is the difference between hitting a target and winning the game? Look, hitting a short-term goal, like a certain return on an investment, it feels fantastic. But here's the catch. It doesn't guarantee you'll win the long game of financial security. There are these subtle, really powerful risks lurking just beneath the surface that can turn what looks like a victory into a serious long-term problem.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll talk about what our target really means. We'll call it the price of a promise. Then we'll uncover two of those critical hidden dangers, the reinvestment trap and what happens when trust is lost. And finally, we'll get into how to manage it all on the financial tightrope.
Okay, first things first. Before we can even begin to talk about risk, we have to be absolutely crystal clear on what the goal is. Every investment is really a promise. It's a promise to fund someone's retirement, to pay for something in the future, or to secure your own financial freedom. And that promise, well, it has a price.
That price is what the pros call the required return. Now, this isn't just some number you hope for. It's the absolute non-negotiable minimum you need to earn to make taking on the risk worthwhile. Think of it as the baseline, the number that tells you if your investment is actually succeeding or just, treading water.
And here's what's so important to get. This number isn't just pulled out of thin air. It's actually built from three key pieces. First, you've got the risk-free rate. That's what you could get from something super safe, like a government bond. Second, there's expected inflation, because let's face it, your money has to grow faster than prices are rising. And third, there's the risk premium. That's the extra kick, the extra return you demand for taking a leap into riskier things, like stocks.
At the end of the day, hitting this required return is all about keeping that promise. If you fall short, the promise is broken. A retiree's income might not be secure, a client could be let down, or your own financial goals could just slip right through your fingers. It's the foundation for everything that follows.
All right, this brings us to our first hidden danger, and it is a sneaky one. It's a risk that can pop up even when your investments do exactly what they're supposed to. I call it the danger of winning too soon.
This is what's known as reinvestment risk. It happens when your investments, say a bond, mature and pay you back your cash. But it's before you actually need the money for your future obligation. So now you have this pile of cash, but you've got to put it back to work, and the world might look a whole lot different.
Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you bought a 10-year bond paying a nice 5%. A decade goes by, it matures, you get all your money back. Success, right? But what if new bonds are now only paying 2%? If you still need that money to keep growing for another 10 years, you've just walked straight into the reinvestment trap. Your past success doesn't help your future returns.
And this is a massive challenge for big institutions like pension funds. They have promises to keep that are decades away. If their bonds mature and they're forced to reinvest that money at much lower rates, a shortfall can literally appear out of nowhere. It threatens their ability to pay future retirees, even if every single investment they made in the past was a home run.
Okay, so that was an internal threat. Now let's talk about our second hidden danger. This one has nothing to do with interest rates or market returns. It's about something way less tangible, but honestly, it can be even more destructive. It's about trust. We're talking about reputational risk. This is the danger that a company's good name gets dragged through the mud, and it sets off a devastating chain reaction. Customers walk away, sales plummet, and suddenly you're drowning in legal fees. It's a risk that you can't plug into a financial model because it lives in the minds of the public.
And what's wild is how a purely technical problem can trigger this massive non-technical risk. Think about it. A cyber attack that leaks customer data isn't just a tech headache. It is a fundamental breach of trust that directly damages a company's reputation, and it can very quickly lead to very real, very expensive consequences. So let's put these two side by side for a second. Reinvestment risk is basically an internal numbers game. It's a puzzle of financial planning and timing. But reputational risk, that's an external game of perception. It attacks the very trust that holds a business together. Both of them can be absolutely devastating, but they come from completely different worlds.
So, with all these complex, often invisible threats floating around, how on earth do organizations actually manage them? Well, it's definitely not about guesswork or just reacting when a crisis hits. It's about walking a financial tightrope with a very structured, very disciplined approach.
Yeah, the pros don't just cross their fingers and hope for the best. They use a continuous cycle of identification, measurement, and control to try and stay ahead of these threats. This kind of systematic approach turns risk management from just a defensive move into a core piece of their entire strategy.
So here's what that process looks like. First up, you identify every possible risk you can think of, not just the obvious financial ones. Then you measure them. You figure out, how likely is this to happen, and how bad could the damage be? Next, you put controls in place to dial down that threat. And finally, and this is key, you monitor everything, all the time, because the world never ever stops changing.
And this, right here, is probably the most important takeaway of all. This idea is captured so well in this quote about enterprise risk management, or ERM. It's not just about playing defense and avoiding bad things. By understanding your risks on a really deep level, you can actually put your company in a position to take smarter risks, to seize opportunities that your competitors are way too afraid to even touch.
So, I'll leave you with this question to think about. A balance sheet can tell you part of the story for sure, but the greatest threats, and also the greatest opportunities, they often lie in the risks you can't see, the ones you can't easily quantify, things like reinvestment timing and public trust. Managing those is the true test of winning the long game. Thanks for tuning in.